Today marking the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, and that camp has been inscribed on UNESCO's World Heritage List for decades, and the head of UNESCO will be taking part in those official commemorations of the liberation of that Nazi death camp later today. UNESCO has been pivotal in keeping the memory of what happened during the Holocaust alive and has just released a new series of guidelines for both teachers and journalists. We're going to talk more about this now with Karel Fracapane from the Division for Peace and Sustainable Development at UNESCO. Karel, thanks so much for coming to join us on the set. Just a first question before we look into your guidelines. The liberation of Auschwitz happened 80 years ago, which in the grand scheme of history isn't actually that long ago, and yet there's a new study of 8 countries that shows that many young people around the world have never even heard of the Holocaust. I mean, the numbers are shocking. 46% of young adults in France say they haven't heard of the Holocaust or only slightly familiar with it. Why?
Well, because there is a shift in generation right now. I mean, you can imagine that I spoke to grandparents that went through this history, and I had somehow a direct relationship to it. If you take young people in middle school or in high school today, they will never meet a witness of that time. So there is this idea that this becomes a very remote time in history. So this is a first important element to consider when you speak with educators about that issue.
Right, and UNESCO, of course, is now trying to fight against this by publishing these new guidelines, in part for teachers. I mean, talk us through that. What are you proposing to teachers to do?
So there are a number of issues that this generational shift is raising. I mean, naturally, it's important, first of all, to support teachers and education authorities in general to teach more about the Holocaust, but also better. And these studies are interesting in the sense that they give us an idea of the impact nowadays of what has been done by the different countries that are engaged in this. What we know also is that there are a number of countries that are not yet doing that work. So the role of UNESCO here is to sort of stimulate more work, to advocate for more education about the Holocaust. But as you said, there are a number of challenges. Knowledge gaps, of course. So this, of course, leads us to sort of develop this kind of guidelines for education authorities, but other much more problematic issues such as Holocaust denial, distortion, which are forms of anti-Semitism. So one of the challenges today that Holocaust memory is facing is actually forms of anti-Semitism. There is a sort of a way of denying or going against this memory today. So the aim of those guides is to help teachers actually handle these problems. I mean, you're dealing with manifestations of hate, including in the classroom here. So we've developed 2 guides for teachers and teacher trainers, but mostly teachers, on how to handle these problems in the classroom. It gives them some background about what is Holocaust denial, how this history can be distorted also through social media today, and gives us some methodologies, some pedagogy on how to handle this. But this is, of course, an overall problem. I mean, what ends up in the classroom is usually a social issue. And so we decided to work also with journalists in order to help them report on these phenomena that are sometimes quite difficult to identify.
Just getting back to the teacher training program, I mean, it's already in place in part in certain countries in Europe. Have you been able to see if it's doing anything, if it's actually changing people's minds?
It does, actually, in many ways. But here you deal with educational matters that require long-term evaluation. Here we're talking about changing people's minds, changing people's values, changing people's behaviors, so they understand what this history was about, what was the impact of this history, and how it still resonates in our world today, and how you can, go about as a citizen in your societies with that kind of knowledge. How do you carry it in your everyday life? So this is a very difficult endeavor, actually, educationally speaking, and in particular for teachers. So what UNESCO has been doing actually 2 different things very clearly. One is to promote Holocaust education worldwide. So we're doing this in particular with the US Holocaust Memorial Museum, and we've been working with countries from all regions of the world, including Europe, in order to see where the gaps are and try to improve education about the Holocaust while providing them with new tools, new methodologies, fostering international cooperation to this effect. And the second thing is to deal with anti-Semitism today. As I said, one of the challenges that is facing Holocaust memory, research, education today is actually anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews. So you need to deal with it as well. And that's a different and an additional endeavor that member states need to really undertake. So we've been working with the European Commission in particular in order to tackle this problem. And here again, the idea of UNESCO is to support education authorities, to support member states, and to support teachers, all sorts of education stakeholders, to actually tackle this problem as it manifests itself today.
UNESCO is also establishing a research center in the home of the former Auschwitz commander Rudolf Höss, who was actually a central character in an award-winning film that some of our viewers might have seen called The Zone of Interest. Do you think that popular culture is another way to perhaps make sure people remember all the evil that happened during the Holocaust?
Yes, of course, it is important, and I would say all the means that can be used in order to promote that history, to foster an understanding of what it was, is good. Nonetheless, it's not necessarily the same quality as education that is provided in schools, as academic knowledge that should be transmitted through the education system. And see, this is where we should really intervene. And I would say that the impact that is shown in the studies that you mentioned earlier is also maybe not only due to the fact that we need more education about the Holocaust, but also some gaps that are transmitted in popular knowledge. And that may be a problem in itself. So you need to actually work on all fronts. Look at what education systems can do, and work directly with the overall youth, including in the digital world, for instance, where you have a lot of information that is not quality information, that is even sometimes hateful information, and that should be tackled as well.
Well, thank you so much, Karel, for all the work you're doing with UNESCO at the Division for Peace and Sustainable Development. Thank you for coming in to talk to us. Karel Fracapane.